a friend of mine sent me like a video yesterday of his like 3-year-old kid like just head banging super hard to like Cosmic Grave, and it was just it's a great thing to see.
That's so sick. Have to
Yeah,
start
man.
them young on the trench,
Right?
the trench juices. Do that intro.
Cool, man.
It's funny because the episode I did, just this, like the last podcast, I tried to start it with cracking a Red Bull and it like froze up again. So maybe there's something with like Red Bull doesn't want to have its official shout out.
Right. There's some weird chemical in it that like fucks with the airwaves.
Yeah. But yeah, thanks again everyone for tuning in. This is another episode of the Scoped Exposure podcast. Super excited to be sitting down with Bryce, the second half of the riff orchestra of Trench. Thanks again for taking some time out of your day to chat with me.
For sure, man. Thanks for having me. I'm stoked to talk to you for a bit and hang out.
Yeah, and this is something me and Bryce have been trying to orchestrate within the last few months. I think we were trying to plan some things in person before even all the stuff went down. But obviously, with the release of Blossom, I wanted to, figure that out. And Bryce is definitely a day oneer as far as being a supporter for Scoped. Fun fact, he is the very first subscriber on our YouTube channel. And I think I mentioned that to you like even just a few months ago, and you're like, oh, I had no idea.
Yeah, man, it's pretty funny. I remember like when you first started Scoped, and it was one of the first like Wild Rose before it was called Wild Rose. And you filmed Trench and you were like, yo, I got this video. So as soon as you like started Scoped, I was like, follow, I got to see all these vids. Like, It's going to be really cool.
Yeah. So, this is obviously every episode of the podcast is special, but I'm excited to be doing some conversations. And obviously we're going to talk about the new Trench album. But obviously Bryce has listened to a number of these podcasts, so he knows the deal as far as giving context on how he got into playing music, what got him into music. So, Bryce, how about you take us back in time and give us a little Bryce comic book episode 001, the origin story, if you will.
So I started going to shows in Calgary like 16 years ago. It's been a long time. The first show was just like community hall show. It was somewhere down in like the Southwest, and for the old Calgary heads, it was like a band called Olivia, and I think a band Ghost Cried Murder as well. And then there was a few like punk bands. Those guys were kind of more like metalish bands, metalcore bands, and there's a few punk bands, and it was like a mixed show. And I just saw a flyer near my just near my school, near my neighborhood, and I was like, what is this? And so I just like checked it out. I actually went alone. I didn't have any friends to go with, and but it was cool because I like, even that first show I met some people, and like ever since then I started going to shows, and it was awesome.
Yeah.
And that's basically like the very start of it, and then kept going to shows and starting bands with friends, and throughout the years, just always continue that, and always just had a love for the local music, hardcore, and it's great, man.
Yeah. And 16 years is like a very long time as far as you being around to see the rises and falls of different venues, different bands, and maybe not falls in a negative term, just people change and move on and do different things. So maybe can you talk about and I'd like to maybe compare the two as far as when you first were going to shows and, how it is kind of now, kind of pre-quarantine. But maybe talk about the very first few bands that you started and what you were doing in those bands.
So like I had a few bands when I was like literally like 14, 15 years old, and they didn't really do too much. I think we played like one show with one of those bands. When I was about 16, I had a band. We were called Rancor, and we played like a good amount of shows. Around the time, there's a venue called the New Black that was in Calgary, and there'd be a lot of shows there quite often. We play shows like that, and then from there, sort of from Rancor spawned War Elephant, which in War Elephant, actually, sorry, back to Rancor, Jay Breen, like the singer of Trench, was actually in Rancor with me. So
Right.
I've known Jay like forever, and we've always kind of like done music things together. Um, and yeah, and then War Elephant, War Elephant was me and Liam, like part of Scoped Exposure.
Yeah.
Liam Wilson home.
Shout out Liam.
Yeah, shout out Liam.
Mm-hmm.
Cody, like the singer of Serration, drummer of Mortality Rate, and
he was playing bass, correct?
He played bass in Rancor.
Right.
Yeah, and but he played drums in War Elephant.
Gotcha. Yeah. I was going back through photos and I was like, oh, look at all these like skinny dudes like
right?
just playing different stuff. Sometimes less tattoos for sure.
For sure. Young, untattooed versions of us.
Yeah.
And yeah, man, War Elephant was fun. And after War Elephant ended, I kind of had a while where I didn't really play in any bands. And then I picked up guitar again and kind of started Trench. I just hit up Jay one day and I hit up the Chans and I was like, hey guys, like, you want to start a band? And yeah, it just went from there.
Yeah.
And joined shortly after.
Right. Yeah. Because I remember the very first time I saw you guys was I'm trying to remember if it was the very first time I filled the Calgary Fest when it was called Southern Alberta. What did you guys play that one? I'm trying to. Yeah, we did. Yeah, and that was like right at the beginning. Like I think that was actually our second or third show. Oh, okay. So it was like shortly after we had just put out like our very first EP back in like 2016. Yeah, and I remember you guys very like it's very vivid for me because I was kind of like that was the very first time I ever was to Calgary to like play, but not even. Well, yes, actually, I did play a show. Usurper played that, but I was filming as well, and I remember I didn't really know anyone in the band at the time, but I remember Jay being in the sling and I knew that he tattooed, and I think I was talking with Jess from Mortality Rate and she was, doing his books for the time and she was like, oh yeah, like I'm trying to figure things out and you guys put on a killer performance and Jay's just in this like arm sling. I'm like, this is super sick. And I think the live presence of you guys really like stuck with me as well. It wasn't just like, head banging to certain parts. It was like lots of movement, especially from like the Chans as well. For sure. So, like I've done a previous podcast with Cole and we talked a lot about, like the writing process. And he said like a lot of the riffs originate from you as you were kind of like the primary guitar player. So maybe talk about the Trench songs overall are kind of like, beautifully chaotic in a way. So how do you take certain ideas and apply those to different time signatures? Because you guys aren't really like a 4/4 kind of band. Yeah, for sure. So kind of with that, like when I was in Rancor, I played guitar in Rancor, and then we moved on to War Elephant, and I kind of stopped playing guitar while I was in War Elephant. And I really didn't have too much of a desire to, just because I felt like I got to that point where I felt kind of like everything had been done and, I couldn't make anything that was interesting. It was just going to be, typical shit. Right. And I just really had no desire to. And, just a while after War Elephant, I was going through some things in my life. Like my mom had just passed away and I really, I was like, I picked up guitar again and I just said, kind of like, fuck it to like trying to sound like anything. I'm just going to play some heavy music and some like, some different sort of stuff. And so that's kind of like the chaotic, at least from like my writing point of view. It's, I'm not ever trying to like write a certain way or anything. Right. And yeah, it's really cool. Like I write most of the riffs and I'll bring it to the guys and sometimes, they'll build off that. In Trench, we really allow
any ideas to flow.
Mm.
Like we're very open about our creative stuff, our creative choices with each other, and we all input ideas. Like, you know, even Jay as the vocalist, you know, he'll give ideas. We just, you know, we constantly just create, and we're very open about it. So everybody, there's never like a set way that a song's supposed to be. It's like everybody's free to do whatever they want to do within the song.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, it's really cool. Sometimes also like even just in the arrangement of like riffs and like a song structure, sometimes it'll stay like the same from what I originally wrote, and sometimes we'll just totally like chop and screw it, just like, you know, just sometimes, you know, we'll take two songs and we'll make them into one, like that sort of thing. And there's really just no rules. We just allow ourselves to openly write in whatever creative manner we want to.
Yeah. And Cole kind of pulled back the curtain a little bit, because as far as the morale of the band is really high, because you guys are like friends first, and you know, you guys hang out constantly. I think he mentioned like 2 times a week you guys have like trench miss and all this kind of stuff. So like obviously, you know, that is like, that's not the case for every single band. Like not every single band, maybe all the members are kind of spread out in different parts of a region, or, you know, people's schedules are a little bit different. So was that the idea of like, okay, we're going to do this band and we're going to be like, invest a lot of time into like writing and recording and putting out good music and playing shows, but obviously like we want to hang out? Or was that just kind of like a natural progression?
I think it was just more so a natural thing. Like, you know, I always knew the Chance from going to shows. Like they played in a metalcore band called The Fallacy.
Yeah.
You know, the same time that like War Elephant and Rancor, we were doing our things in that. And I'd always known the Chans, but was never, you know, as close with them as I am now. And kind of through Trench, it was like we started it, and me and Jay had always been really close friends. I've known Jay since we went to junior high and high school with each other. So we've known each other forever. And Cole, I've known Cole like same way I've known Chance, just through years of shows. Cole played in a band called Gravemaker as well as Act Fast. And, you know, but through Trench, like at least like my relationship like with everybody, it's really grown, and it's like we love to hang out. Like at Jam, it's like we will hang for a long time, as well as, you know, Jam, of course. Yeah. We're still very dedicated, obviously, to like writing music and always practicing and stuff. But yeah, it's like, it's great. And, you know, we'll also hang out even if it's not like music related or Jam related, like just to be friends, you know. And yeah, I think it's really important because it, you know, I find it's hard. Like there are bands like you can be in a band and not be like super close to people and just have it like a business thing. But I love, you know, the whole like friendship side of it. It's really It's a great thing.
Yeah. It's ultimately like a hardcore scene overall is a community of people. It's not just like, okay, this is an event and it's, you know, it's not all business and games, so to speak. Because, you know, like there are lots of genres of music that are like that just have like shows and events, but they don't have that like sauce as far as like, you know, people who make relationships and make friendships and make connections and then start bands off those connections. Yeah,
totally.
It's super important. So we've kind of covered the origins of how Trench came to be, and like I've definitely seen you guys evolve a lot over the years musically, just how you guys present yourself, and I eventually want to get to the Blossom. Like that will be a big part of this podcast, but maybe you can talk about what's been the biggest change that you've seen as far as how you guys have grown as a band from those origin days in like 2016 to now.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. Just a constant like exploration of music, really. Like, sure. You know, we just always kind of want to like push the boundary of whatever we want to do. Like, you know, on Blossom, like the song Blossom 2, it's like a very post rock type song, and it's just like, you know, we want to be able to do that and just create whatever, but still, keep it trench. And but in the even the early days, we did have like softer songs, and but musically as well, like we've incorporated Cole incorporates the electronic side of it.
Yeah.
Cole is also a DJ, is like, he's a full DJ, guitar player, just creative, really creative guy.
Mm-hmm.
And we've incorporated that along to Blossom, as well as like Bit and Gift of Guilt.
Yeah.
And it's a really cool thing to have, because we all love that electronic element to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
And as well as Jay at one point started playing synth.
Yeah.
And it's really cool. It's cool live, and it adds like a really cool texture to certain songs. And it's just that whole extra dynamic, I guess, of the synth and the electronics, as far as musically, instead of just typical like guitar, bass, and drums.
Yeah.
So
did you ever feel like there was certain people, either locally or just like wherever, who kind of like put like, because I think that's a big point that you brought up, like being like letting the limits of exploration be limitless as far as musically, like, hey, I'm gonna throw this pedal on this song, or Jay's like, I'm gonna do this, or Tommy's like, oh, I'm gonna get this weird obscure symbol or whatever. So did you feel like there was people being like, oh, trench is this, and you guys are like, nah, we're just gonna keep on pushing and really continue to turn heads?
For sure. Like I don't totally know, because everyone's perception of us, like everyone's has always given us really kind compliments. Like you always hear like, you guys are heavy, like you guys are really heavy.
Yeah.
But people always tell us that they like that we do soft things and different things, and kind of like when we write a set, the set is supposed to be its own thing. The songs flow together. Jay doesn't really talk in between songs, and it's kind of like, once the music starts, it doesn't stop until it's done.
Right.
And that's so the perception. So back to your question, I guess the perception of people, I don't really know if they've ever thought we were one specific thing.
Mm-hmm.
We've been compared to certain bands, that I'm like, okay, I can like kind of get why you say that, but like not totally.
Right.
I've heard like Zabalba and stuff, and I don't think we sound like Zabalba personally. But it's up to the listener, right? Everybody perceives it differently, and kind of focuses on different aspects of it.
Yeah. And like there's always like certain things that I see, at least on the channel, where people are like comparing a certain band to like something. I'm like, yes, but like, maybe I'm closer friends with those people and actually know their direct influences. But there was a couple of things that I want to dive into there. So first being Cole being a DJ and doing a lot of electronical work. I listened to a podcast, or it was just a video where Jamie from Code Orange was talking about the way that they were recording their newest album versus the one beforehand. Is they thought that they could just slap like analog recordings and digital together, and like obviously like they realize that there's some things that you need to kind of prep. It's not just like stapling it together. So did you guys kind of have that same, not difficulty, but same kind of like, okay, we need to be like, because a lot of the soundscapes and stuff that you do, like some stuff is like pedal work that you were doing, but then there's some, so how, at least on the Blossom record, was that like tackled?
So as far as like the crazy effects, whether it's like the electronic stuff or the pedal work, a lot of the pedal work kind of gets written into it as we're writing the songs, just naturally as a band, as we're jamming them out. And we just find interesting things to do, whether it's, it's a part where Cole's playing more of a rhythm and I can do some wild stuff on pedals, or vice versa, or just wild stuff on pedals, like within the riff. there was a few parts on Blossom that like we kind of added in studio where it was just like, okay, maybe I can like switch to this pedal here just to like change the tone a bit or thicken it up. But most of it comes through writing. And then as far as like Cole's more electronics, as well as the synth, like Jay will write the synth as we're kind of in the jam space, creating the songs, you know, figuring out what sort of melody he wants to do underneath a part if it calls for it. And then usually Cole will create the electronics, you know, on his own at home in his own space. And he'll bring it to the band, and sometimes he'll bring like a couple and we'll like listen to them, and he always has an idea for it, whether it's like where it should go in the song, you know, sort of a song that it complements with. Like there's a song on Blossom, it's called Patience, and it's kind of like just like an intro to Hellbent Gate in a way. When we play that song live, we'd play like a live version of that. There's a lot of synth and some electronics in there, and you know, so there's always like a purpose when I think Cole's creating these different sort of sounds, and he brings them to the band, and you know, we're like, yeah, that's really cool. And you know, I don't think he's ever brought one that we didn't really like. You know, he's great at doing that. He finds the craziest sounds and puts them together in cool beats and compositions, and it's really cool.
Yeah. And the other thing that you brought up on the last thing was just talking about how like, you know, Jay is not someone that like will say something like there have been a couple sets where I have seen like he'll just say like one little thing, like or dedicating a song to someone. So but for the most part it's like start and stop, bookend, that's a set. And you know, a lot of songs flow into one another with those ambient and electronic pieces. So how was the process of like recording and then like moving songs around to like flow into everything, or did you have everything laid out before you guys went into the studio to record?
So for Blossom, some of those songs we wrote like before we wrote Gift of Guilt. And then some of them we wrote like, you know, a month before going into the studio sort of thing. And the songs themselves, we came into the studio having already done some pre-pros that we did at Tom's house and Tony's house. You know, and just really like we laid out the structure of all the songs. We came up with the song order through jam, as well as like our pre-pro process. So by the time that we went into the studio and we went to Kelowna to record with Jordan at Udalele Recordings.
Is that how you say it? I've like sometimes you read something, you're like, I don't know how to actually pronounce that.
Man, I still don't totally know. I think it's Udalele. Yeah. Udalele, yeah. So yeah, by the time we were in Kelowna recording Blossom, like we had the exact order of the album already laid out. We had all the transitions of how we wanted the songs to flow into each other. You know, we had everything already planned. So, which was good because, you know, it's a long process to record an album, and it's good being prepared, right?
Oh yeah. And like that extra like pre-pro time like saves so much time in the studio where you guys are actually spending like real dollars to make it happen.
For sure.
I texted you this, but like the very first time I listened to Blossom, it was like 6:30 in the morning. I had woke like my wife is still working thankfully, but she's been going in sometimes early around 8. So I like get up, I make coffee, do breakfast. But it was the day that the album dropped, and I was like, my brain wasn't fully awake, so I was just being so overwhelmed by just the amount of work and like production value that you guys had put into it. And by the end of it, I was just like standing in the kitchen by myself, just like clapping. It was pretty funny. But yeah, let's talk about that the actual process, because you guys, like you said, went to Kelowna and you took an entire month to record it.
It was only like 10 days actually.
Oh, okay.
It was like 9 or 10 days. It was only a week, and then, you know, a bit of traveling time in between. So
sure. Maybe on social it just seemed like it was an entire month.
yeah, for sure.
Record it. And obviously like multiple days afterwards and prior. But Um, yeah, how was that recording process, at least with Jordan? And because not a lot of bands get to do like a real studio kind of session when it comes to like
Mhm.
recording, like even just an EP. Like usually it's something a little bit more bare bones, like doing it with a homie who's got like a small interface and or doing something live off the floor. Um, so tell me about that experience.
So yeah, we got to Kelowna, and the first night that we got to Kelowna, we went to a studio in Kelowna that it was actually the place that we recorded Gift of Guilt at. And we just went to that studio just to do drums. And I think we got there at like 3 in the afternoon or something. And Tom laid down all the drums for the entire album in that night. Just like rocked it out, just like just killed it. Yeah. Tom's a machine, and he was like in the zone, and he just laid it all out. Um, so that first night it was just drums, and we like the next day, we took some time off to just kind of like uh, settle into Jordan's space. Jordan has a studio built like in his house. So through the whole process, we were like all just living in Jordan's house basically. And so the next day they just took some time to kind of like make sure all the drums were in order and kind of like set everything up. And then after that, it was just like right to it. And like every day, it would start with just like me and Cole changing the strings on our guitar, drinking coffee together, and then like getting to recording riffs. And the process that we did it, we kind of did, we built songs per day. So like the first day we did, I think 2 songs of guitar and vocals, bass, everything. And that just allowed Jay throughout the week, to record vocals throughout the week and not have to, try to do it all right at the end and be rushed.
Yeah.
Um,
Or be like worn out by just the amount of screaming and whatnot.
exactly right. So yeah, it was just like a song or 2 songs per day. And at the tail end of it is kind of when we added like the final touches, like the synth and the electronics, and, just those final touches of kind of lining everything up, making sure that, Jordan as a producer understands like exactly how we wanted everything aligned. And through the whole creative process too, like Jordan was an amazing producer. He also there's a Colton Douglas. He's a singer of Cloaker.
Yeah. Shout out Colton. Playing in like 50 Kelowna bands.
Yeah. And C Dougie. Yeah. He was like helping out Jordan in the studio, and he'd provide input. And it was just really great recording with those guys through the whole process. Like, Jordan would like bounce ideas off of us for certain parts, and some of them would stick, others wouldn't. And it was just like, it was a great space to be in for like a week. And it was just a really kind of cool escape from reality. And we just hit away and just made this album,
Yeah. As far as, because there, again, like that is, kind of a luxury as far as like having a studio session, but also someone who's like, invested musically in the band, and the recording. You mentioned that there was a couple of suggestions that he made. What was one that like really like, you're like, why didn't I think of this, and it made the record?
There's some cool things like just suggestions for like different filters on the voices. I have a pedal that I use, and it's kind of like that stereo effect. It's when like the guitar gets really grainy. I refer to it's actually like the very first Boss DS1, and and I bought it when I was like 12 or something, and I refer to it as the shit pedal just because it makes your guitar sound like shit, and it's just more of like an effect. And Jordan like loved that pedal, and so for certain little parts he would be like, yo, like add it here, add it there. And sometimes we'd add it even just to like thicken up just little tiny things. And So yeah, I think that pedal made a lot more of an appearance because Jordan just like loved the sound of it so much, which was really cool because I really love some of the suggestions, and I'm like, yeah, this makes the song like more interesting, just to have a different sound on that part, and um, as well as there's some cool things that happen just naturally in the studio, just ideas or just little ways to play things differently that just made the song more interesting. Just those, yeah.
Yeah, it's a weird thing, like underestimating the energy that can happen in a room when, like, even when you're just jamming with people and just like some idea comes up and you're like, that's it, like let's roll with that. So when you're not isolated, but when you're in that mindset for 10 days and 12 hours out of the day or whatever, however long the sessions were, like it's bound to happen that the creative juices are just going to mash together and create something really meaningful.
For sure. Yeah. I think actually a good example, I think one that Jordan thought of, the end of Cosmic Grave is like this really heavy breakdown. And I think we originally had it go like a bit faster. And then when we were recording like Tom's drums, Jordan had the suggestion like, yo, slow that the fuck down, like go way slower. And we did it, and we were like, all right, like that's the way it's gonna be now. And it like worked. It was like really cool. And I love how slow that breakdown is now, because it just
and let's transition to talking about maybe some of your favorite tracks, because I've done a few listens front to back of the record, and there's a lot of the first time I talked with Cole, as far as he was kind of like mentioning, like, yeah, there's a lot of like really different stuff that we're doing that isn't on past Trench releases. A lot more like melodic stuff and experimental stuff. So maybe tell me what your favorite track is on the record and why.
Man, that's tough. That's a tough question, because
they're all like your kids in a way. You're like, oh, how can I pick a favorite?
Totally. And like, at least from my perspective, they're like, they're all really unique. They're all Trench, but they each have their own kind of like vibe or different few vibes. But like the second half of Blossom, well, all of Blossom 1, I really like that song. And I thought that was a cool song, how the first half of it is like this just full out heavy song, and then it jumps into like more of that like mid-pace melodic with like that really chuggy guitar sort of, and like it was just kind of cool to do a song like that where it like shifts vibe halfway through, but is still the same, and still lyrically is the same message throughout. But yeah, no, it was also really cool doing songs like Living in Salt and Abandon, because like I feel like the songs we write, they're people would call them like metal songs, but we have a very hardcore vibe in the sense that it's got to be like short and sweet. Can never really let anything get too boring, and just that short, sweet, just hit you in the face and song's over sort of thing.
And like as far as like the podcast before this one, like that's totally different band, but Drain is kind of like the same thing. It's like thrash hardcore, but it's like very short and to the point, and as soon as it's over you want to like repeat it. And I find that on a lot of these songs for myself. Can I tell you some of my favorites?
Dude, I would love to hear some of your favorites.
So absolutely, I just want to like look at the tracks. I know what they are. Crystal Shame for sure. Just like a very, very heavy focus track, but I think tied with like when you brought up Blossom 1, like that I think is the best showcase as far as like the experimental version or thoughts on this record. Like you said, starting really heavy and like fully and very seamlessly transitioning into like a more melodic side. Cosmic Grave though is like that's a bop. Like it's I imagine a lot of people dancing to that when you guys start playing that one live.
For sure, man. Yeah, that one's really fun, really heavy, and it's so fun to play live.
Mm-hmm.
It's been kind of like a tease to record this album, and we haven't really played many of these songs live. Like
Yeah.
we played Hellbent Gate for like live for a long time, but we only ever really played like we played a shortened down version of The Face of Raw,
Right.
just sort of like as a heavy interlude. And then we played Living in Salt once at Broken City. So all these other songs, we haven't been able to play them live because of what's happening in the world and this whole pandemic. And but it's gonna feel really good when we get to. And
Absolutely. And yeah, like that was, I think, something that we chatted about when the record dropped, is like, because I have like not a magnifying glass, but like I have a lot of archived videos of like certain sets. Like I tend to pick up on certain riffs and even like changes. So like, if I'm trying to think of an example, but like a band like Serration, let's say, they would play one of their new songs before their latest EP, but the first time they played it at Wild Rose, and after it came up, I was like, oh, I hear that you guys changed those things, which I think is kind of cool to see the progression of that. But yeah, there was only two. It was like 1.5 songs as far as what you guys had premiered live.
Yeah.
Face of Raw is another great song as far as
For
like
sure.
a bunch of different effects. Is there a connection between Blossom 1 and 2 as far as like lyrically, or a reason that you guys wanted to have it connected but like separated in the lineup?
So we kind of thought it was just a interesting idea how like Blossom 1, at least I thought, like musically, Blossom 1, it's like heavy, and then it sort of goes into this softer part at the end of it.
Right.
And then Blossom 2 is like kind of like a full soft song. So in a way, like thematically, I guess in the music, it's a progression from that heavy just downward into like something, something that's not heavy.
Right.
Still heavy musically, I guess, but like not heavy in the heavy sense.
Yeah, just thick as far as the stuff that's going on.
For sure.
I've also noticed, and this is a little similar to some other releases I've seen in the last couple weeks here, is the 2 songs that you guys put out. Like, I've seen a lot of bands who put out a new album and they'll tease a couple songs before, but they kind of put those at the front of the album and then everything on the back. But you guys, like Living in Salt is maybe at the 50 way point, and then like Hellbent Gate is like almost like it's the second last song of the record. So was that kind of in mind, like, hey, let's introduce all these people to this stuff, versus like, oh, like, remember this song, we put it out 2 months ago?
Yeah, for sure. So with our singles, like we definitely wanted Hellbent Gate as a single, because like Jesse from Misery Signals is on that song, and how can you not want to have that as a single when Jesse's on it? It was all really cool for us being like Misery Signals fans. And then Living in Salt, I think that one, it just really grabs your attention, like it just goes straight into it. And it's also like, we love that song. It's a ripper of a song, so we just thought it would be like a really good single. That was also like suggestion from Jordan and C Dougie. They were like, yo, Living in Salt, like you guys should definitely like put that out as like the first single. I thought it was cool when you said that Blossom 1 was a really good kind of representation of like Trench, because it has so many different aspects in it. And we actually, like, through those discussions, we were gonna actually have Blossom 1 as our first single, just as a like, get that full sort of idea of what the album's about.
Right.
In the first single, but we decided that like 3 singles would be like too much, so we just decided to only do Living in Salt and Hellbent Gate.
Yeah. It ends up being like, okay, like you've already shown so much of like the shoulder, like it's time just to show the whole thing,
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So like you kind of mentioned, this is a tough time for a lot of different bands who are kind of who have releases that they've worked on for months and months and months and months, and they're trying to figure out, okay, well, like what's the best way to either release this during this time and still have traction. So I know you guys like did some stuff with Decibel and Revolver, and obviously like this podcast is another way to promote that. But do you have any thoughts on like doing kind of like extra things on top of the release to kind of further the message of the record?
Yeah, I think so. Like we were really lucky, you know, that Revolver and Decibel, like we have a guy who kind of helps us out with that PR stuff. And it was amazing that, you know, we sent our stuff off to them and they were like, hey, like we want to do an article about you guys and we want to premiere your album. Like that was super cool for us, like super cool for me. Like I bought my first Revolver magazine when I was like 12 years old. It was like probably like Korn or Slipknot on the cover and like, you know, and it was like, so it was really cool. And, you know, I think it definitely helps like just new people find your music. So, you know, if you can write good emails and try to send them off to different media outlets, like I think that's a great thing that bands should do. You know, because you want people to hear your music, right?
Yeah. And I was thinking about this like just before we were on the chat. Like I was on a walk with Marty and I was like, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? Like someone's just either going to not respond to your email, like, or they're going to be like, no. Like the more times you try to like send stuff out to like, or just like inquire with people on collabs. Like I had a couple bands even reach out to me to like who want to be on the podcast to promote their stuff, and yeah, I was like, well, like the fact that you're reaching out feels like cool because you respect Scoped enough to like be a platform to showcase that.
Totally.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, like you said earlier too, like we were gonna do a podcast you know, earlier in person before, you know, the pandemic, and you know, I think I hit you up and I was like, hey man, like, do you want to do this sort of like as a promotional tool for the album or whatever? But, you know, in hindsight, it's kind of cool now that we're doing one after and you can ask me questions about the album, because I think that's really cool too.
Yeah. Because like, I think originally you actually had a pretty interesting idea. You wanted to have me listen to the album and kind of like react to it. And, like I was like down for it. I'm like, I want to see how people would take that. But I do think that like being able to hear an album, so there's actual like, you know, like connection versus like I think both ideas could work, but you know, like I'm glad that we're doing it this way.
For sure. And I'm also I'm glad that you got to hear the album, you know, just naturally start to finish, you know, minus the singles that come out, but like, yeah, I think it's because, you know, that's sort of our intention with writing the albums the way we do, is that, you know, it's supposed to be an album,
right?
You can totally listen to it on shuffle. Like in certain songs, like there's kind of weird noises at the end of the songs, and we intentionally had those noises sometimes at the end of the songs instead of the beginning, so that, you know, if you don't want to sit through like the end, you know, you can just skip the end.
Right.
You know, sometimes people's attention span, they don't want to sit through like 30 seconds of noise. So, you know, we purposely put those things. That's
interesting that you guys only put it towards the end. You're like, oh, well, like if you want to listen, just back up, do the song again, or just go next.
And then even like the first two songs, like how it's kind of like an intro. And then the intro is a separate track to then like the second song, and you know, that's like if you don't want to sit through the intro and you just want to get right into the heavy part, it's like, you know, you can if you want.
Right. As far as, have you gotten any feedback from homies or other people listening to the record on like any other favorites that people have?
A few friends really liked Crystal Shame, like you said. Like they were like, that song's just so heavy. And there's some really cool, we got some really cool compliments about like Blossom 2 and just how different it is. And how it just, you know, totally stands on its own, even though it's not like a lot of Trench. Yeah, we've got like really good compliments all around. A friend of mine sent me like a video yesterday of his like 3-year-old kid like just head banging super hard to like Cosmic Grave, and it was just it's a great thing to see.
That's awesome. Have to start them young on the trench, the trench juices. Yeah, I think when things hopefully go back to normal and you guys can kind of like do a proper release show or something, is the plan to play that album front to back?
Yeah, so we were gonna do that for Wild Rose this year. Yeah. Like our set was gonna be just Blossom front to back.
Yeah.
And it would have been next week actually. Like we had a little tour planned with Wrist Meets Razor and the guys from Stepping Stone. Right. And for the East, like for the Winnipeg and Regina shows that we were gonna do like a mixed set and have some Gift of Guilt songs, just because we've never played those songs out there. Right. But then for like the cities that have seen those songs before, because we commonly go out to like Vancouver and Kelowna as well as playing Calgary, we were going to do like a few shows where we did just the full album front to back. So I'm sure we'll do it at some time, whether once this is over or if one day we set up something where we can do it like a live stream of the album or something like. But yeah, we'll figure all of that out when circumstances allow, I guess.
Yeah, one day at a time right now. It's kind of the move. And I hope that does come to fruition, because I know there's a lot of people who are like just eager to get back to doing shows. But obviously the main thing right now is like making sure we can go back sooner than later.
For sure.
As far as, did you want to get nerdy and talk about some gear?
Yeah, man, we can totally talk about anything you want, man.
So you mentioned that there was like a couple like pedals that when you were taking it into the studio, and I think I talked a little bit about gear stuff with Cole. He had mentioned that you had a pedal that there was plans to use it heavily on the record, and whether that happened or not, I'm curious what, if you know off the top of your head, what pedal that is. I think it's like was it a looper or something?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I got a new looper right off like right before we played, and right before we recorded the album. And it wasn't that I really used it heavily. Like I think I only use it at a few parts to just loop and like make weird reverse sort of soundscapes. But I think maybe Cole was saying that he got one of those loopers because he saw what it could do, and he was like, oh man, like I want this just to like experiment with. Right. And he was really stoked on that.
Do you have any other favorites on your board?
Obviously the freeze pedal. I love the freeze pedal. It's just a really cool, it's interesting because it's so simple. It just sustains whatever note you're playing indefinitely as long as you're holding it. But the rest of your guitar playing comes through as well, so it's like we add weird squeals on top of like rhythm sort of riffs, and just do sort of interesting things with it. And yeah, that's mostly it. I found I didn't play like too much pedals on Blossom, just more so just like things for tone. Like I was saying, Jordan really loved me using that sort of stereo shit pedal, as I call it. So that definitely made its way into the album more. And but yeah, it's pedals is an interesting thing because you don't want to like overdo it. And I never try to overdo it, just use it where it needs it and create these really large sounding soundscapes, I guess.
And the last thing you want to do is like go in and then be like, yeah, this is super sick, and then you're like, oh, I have another pedal I have to add to my regular board now. For sure. Yeah, I've actually since like the start of Trench, I really haven't like added any pedals to my board. Okay. I've changed one, and I've got a different looper pedal, and I've always like, it gets to a point where it's like, I don't need more shit. I just need to figure out
what else I can do with, the gear that I already have. Like, how can I use these things to do something I haven't done before?
Yeah. Being efficient that way.
Yeah.
Cool.
And also,
oh no, you go ahead.
Oh no, it's all good, man. Yeah, it's all good. Yeah.
So obviously, Blossom is available everywhere right now. Apple Music, Spotify, Google Play, on Bandcamp as well. I didn't see the icon when I was looking through that. Okay,
it's cool. On Bandcamp. I think it's as well on like SoundCloud.
Right.
So yeah, it's out everywhere, and yeah.
And what's do you guys have like future plans as far as like other ways of like raising awareness, doing like any music videos? You had mentioned like if you guys could do a live stream, like you definitely would.
Yeah, for sure. We like we did too for the singles that we released. It was actually Cole Young in Trench. He made those visualizer videos.
Right.
And yeah, those are really cool. And we've kind of talked about maybe doing like another video, something similar but kind of different. But we're not totally sure yet. And, through this whole thing of not being able to be with each other, like we still FaceTime really often as a band and just like hang out. We'll catch up over FaceTime and still talk Trench things. Right. And, already right now, like we're writing new songs, just because, we can. So I'm recording stems to songs and sending them off to the boys, and they're putting their parts on it. And, right. Even if it's not anything that'll see the light of day for a long time, or maybe it will, like, we always like to be moving forward. So if we can't play shows, got to be doing something, right?
And like you said, like some songs that you had written for this album, like were already written before Gift of Guilt. So like, I'm finding a lot more time to like write riffs right now.
For sure. Yeah.
I've been telling people that Endgame EP2 is probably going to be done before the first EP is out anyway. So
yeah, for sure, man.
Just the way it goes. Cool. And I also wanted to bring this up. I know that a couple of people were inquiring on you guys' Instagram as far as like new merch and stuff that is going to be like tied to the album. And I see you're sporting something. So is that something that you want to
Yeah, man. I'll show this off. So this is one of the new shirts, and it's the artwork from the album.
Hell yeah.
Cole Hadley made these for us. Mm-hmm. As Cole Hadley, Ritual Threads, Scoped Exposure, Snake Pit. Cole's the man.
Cole's the man. Really holding a lot of art things in Calgary together.
For sure, man. So like he's great, and we've made like I think almost all of our merch as far as clothing goes with Cole. So if you're a band looking for someone who'll do merch, like Cole is great. And this one, it's really cool. He's using multiple colors now. He's got the white and the green, and yeah, so we're really excited. We got some other new merch that's coming out that we'll probably release pictures of pretty soon. And yeah, I think we'll be doing like a shipping thing. So if you want to order it online, we might mail it to you. I'm not totally sure on that yet. But yeah.
Sweet. Yeah. Well, Bryce, this has been a blast. You know how we end all these podcasts here, just a favorite mosh story or show story. Anything that comes to mind, bonus points on earlier Calgary Hardcore days if you have something from way back then.
For sure. So yeah, I think one of my wildest mosh stories, I can't remember what band it was. I know it was a really heavy band. I think it might have been like a Zabalba show or something, but it was with my friend Jeff Iverson, who's passed away. It was a great set, and the band's playing, and Jeff runs up to me, and Jeff would mosh hard, and he runs up to me and he's like, "Hey Bryce, can I pick you up and throw you?" And I was like, "Yeah, man." So he like picked me up and like threw me into like a crowd of people, like my body flying sideways through the air. And then he like ran across the pit and like moshed, and then like picked me up again, and then like threw me again. And
round
Jeff,
2, baby.
Jeff was just like such a big, strong guy that he could just like pick me up and cannonball me into people. So that was always one that stuck with me because it was so ridiculous and so fun. And
yeah, that's pretty funny that Dave was like, hey, can I use you as like just a human wrecking ball in a way? You're like,
right.
Let's do it.
Let's do it, man.
Yeah,
let's
awesome.
go.
Yeah, sweet. Well, definitely thankful for Bryce for coming on the pod, and you know, I've been a big fan of Trench ever since I saw you guys like back a long time ago, and I know anyone that I've talked to personally, as far as like when Wild Rose or other things were coming up, like, hey, which bands are you excited to see? Trench was always in the conversation as far as like
That's awesome, man.
A regional act, and I think you guys have something special as far as like, you know, like just musically just have put a lot of soul and blood, sweat, and tears into it. So I commend you. New album is awesome. Go listen to it right after this podcast ends. And Bryce, thank you again for coming on.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much. And I appreciate everything that you do with this podcast, as well as like Scoped Exposure. And man, like, it's really cool, you know, especially in this time where it's like, you know, we can't see people face to face, to, you know, have something to go and watch and still be involved in the hardcore community, and, you know, still feel like you have a connection with people. And, you know, it's really awesome. And also I can't wait to hear Endgame EP1 and EP2.
Oh man, the shameless plug. Thank you, Bryce.
Yeah, man.
Too nice
Thanks.
words.
That's awesome, man. Thanks so much, man.
No problem. Thanks for listening.